Hey guys, welcome to Tiny Fibre Studio. This is episode number 7, and if you are a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back to join me on the next stage of my journey. And if you're new to this is a podcast about knitting, spinning, and specifically about me attempting to become more purposeful in my spinning by only knitting with my own hand-spun yarn for the whole of 2017. In this episode, I have a progress update, also a little bit of project planning for my next project, some discussion about the sample along that we're starting on the 1st of March, and I'll also have a little bit of extra information about my e-spinner, the Hanson Crafts mini spinner, versus spinning on a traditional treadle wheel. So for those of you who are interested in whether it's quicker spinning on an e-spinner, stay tuned for that, and that will come up towards the end of the show. So first of all, works in progress. Over here we have a very nearly completed cowl. Very excited. This is the Alleunmer cowl by Ysolda Teague, and I am literally about 2 rows from finishing this, maybe 1.5 by now. When I last saw you, I was all the way down here, and yeah, about 1.5 rows to go, and then the bind off. I discussed last week that this has a Channel Islands cast on, which gives you that slightly sort of picot-y edge, and I was discussing the fact that I might try and find something similar for the bind off, because it's written just as a rib bind off, so binding off, I think we're on 2 knit 3 purl, but I felt like it would be nice to have something that matched the bottom edge. So I looked around, and there is actually somebody who has created a bind off which matches the Channel Islands cast on. So I'm going to try that. No doubt it will be relatively slow, and there are lots of stitches, so it might take me a little while, but I'm hoping that I might actually have this blocking by tonight. Not that far to go in the knitting, and then just the bind off to go. It's been a really pleasing project because it's fairly mindless, but it's just interesting enough to hold your attention. It's essentially a sort of Gansey style pattern, so it's just lots of patterns involving knits and purls. I think there's a few yarn overs in the whole thing, but nothing too complex. So it's been a really nice project to knit, and I'll actually miss it quite a lot because it has been quite a nice mindless-ish knit. But yeah, almost completed with that, and that is going to be my first complete project done as part of Handspun 17. I finished a pair of gloves a few weeks ago, but they were from yarn that I'd already spun. So this will be a bit of a new step for me, actually spinning and knitting something to completion in this year. So that is the Alleunmer cowl by Ysolda Teague. It's part of Knitworthy 3, and as soon as I saw it, I knew that I was going to have to knit it. The fibre that it was made from was a Polworth Merino and Zwartbles blend. I learned how to say that thanks to one of my viewers. Technically it's something like Zwartbles, but I always feel like I'm kind of taking the mick if I say that. So apparently the accepted English pronunciation is Zwartbles. So Zwartbles it is. It's a tiny little bit of Zwartbles, and so that just gives it the grey tone. Otherwise, obviously with the Polworth and Merino, they're both white-ish fibres. So that's what gives it the grey, is the Zwartbles. And yeah, beautiful. Looking forward to having it finished so that I can wear it, but I will miss it as a project because it's been a really nice, comforting, mindless-ish knit. So that's where we are with the cowl. So given that I am 1.5 rows from finishing said cowl, I felt like I needed to start thinking about my next project. So I think I've got my next project. I mentioned a few weeks ago that I had some Shetland which I'd spun for Tour de Fleece a few years ago, and I'll show you the colourways. These are the existing 3 colourways that I have actually spun up. I did spin a darker version as well. However, that's not going to be going anywhere near this project. I'm actually going to have to spin more dark Shetland because, I think I've mentioned this before, but this was the Shetland that I spun up at the same time as I spun these. And the fibre quality was awful. I don't know where it came from. I got it, apart from the fact that I got it from a D-stash. The rest of the Shetland fibre all was from Jameson and Smith, and that was really good quality. The dark one, she did say that when I bought it on the D-stash, she said, you know, this is from somewhere else, and I can't remember where it was from. As soon as I started working with it, I could tell that this was the one that wasn't from Jameson and Smith, because it is absolutely full of really short fibres, to the point where if I just kind of thwack this a little bit, there are fibres coming out all over the place. And I just think that if I actually made this into a project, there wouldn't be anything left of it. I don't trust it as a yarn. I should have listened to my spinner's intuition and just not bothered actually spinning it in the first place, because I knew it was going to be a nightmare, and I should have just listened to my gut instinct. I didn't. I carried on spinning, and yeah, it's not going to get used in a project because I just don't trust it. I don't think it would hold up to any kind of wear at all. It's full of these really short little guard hairs, and not just that, but generally just quite short fibres. If I just randomly pull little fibres out, they're all pretty short. So it was a bad quality bit of fibre. Shouldn't have spun it in the first place, but I did, and I will learn that lesson. I just won't bother spinning it in the future. But that was spun a few years ago, and I bought some new fibre from World of Wool a few months ago with the intention of making a hopefully matching woolen spun yarn to go with the other 3 colours. My aim with this is that I want to try to, as far as possible, match the fibre preparation and the yarn that I got from these original colours. The fibre is fairly mixed, actually. It's not poor quality. All of the fibres are actually fairly decent length, but there are lots of bits of white in there, like massive long white guard hairs. But that's alright. I'd far rather that than loads and loads of little short bits. So what I've done so far is it came as top from World of Wool. I then drum carded it, pulled it off the drum carder as a bat, and then hand carded it into Rolags. When I say hand carded it, really all I was doing was just laying it onto the hand cards and then rolling it. I don't think it would make a particular difference if I just took it off as kind of faux lags off the drum carder, but because this was the way that I prepped for these skeins, I'd rather just match the fibre prep that I did for them. So that's how far I've got. I've started spinning with, I think I've been through about 3 Rolags, haven't got very far with it. I'm spinning it long draw. I tend to do unsupported long draw, and I'm using the Hanson Crafts mini spinner. The plan with all of these colours is going to be, I think, a bit of a mashup of blank canvas, which is this sweater pattern that I'm wearing today. It's going to be blank canvas mashed up with a colourwork pattern called the Pixelated Pullover, and it's going to be done as a gradient. So if you look at the Pixelated Pullover pattern, you have stripes of colour, and as they go up, the colourwork pattern is kind of pixels blending from one colour to another. I really, really like the way that colourwork looks. I don't necessarily like the shaping of the sweater that much for me personally. So I know that I like blank canvas. I know that blank canvas would work with the gauge that I'm getting from the swatches that I've done with what I've already spun. So I'm going to take the stitch pattern from the Pixelated Pullover and basically graft that onto blank canvas. I'm going to have it as a gradient so that I have the darkest colour at the bottom, then this one, and I'll probably get the gradient done by the time I get to kind of mid-chest level. I'll have had all the pixels kind of fade out by that stage, and then the rest of it will be white. The Pixelated Pullover has another stripe of the bottom colour coming up at the shoulder and across the yoke. That doesn't really work for me because I'm quite short. I feel like having that extra stripe of colour across would just kind of break my body up a little bit too much. It would just make me look really short. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do it as a gradient, darkest colour at the bottom, working up to the white at the top. And hopefully that will work out quite well. Fingers crossed. So that is going to be my next project. Mostly because I need something to knit on the insanely long coach journey to Edinburgh. So I'm hoping that I can get all of the kind of maths of how much of each skein I can use before I need to start switching to the other colour. I'm hoping I can get all of that sorted before I get on the coach. If not, I will go through my stash and just find something mindless that I can knit, or I'll finish those socks that I started a couple of weeks ago. Something like that, but I need some coach knitting. So yeah, that is my next project. A little bit more information about the sample along. Sample along starts on the 1st of March, and our first topic is going to be 2-ply worsted. I know that for a lot of you that is your default yarn. However, I've definitely heard from some people on Ravelry who've said that is not my default yarn. So for those people, this will be a little bit more of a challenge. But really we want to create a baseline against which we can measure all of the other swatches that we do in the future. I did say that when I set up the Ravelry thread, this is the first time that I have organised anything like this. So I'm no doubt missing some details, and some people flagged up a couple of things that are worth mentioning. First thing is, should there be a standard pattern that everybody does? And the answer to that is yes, definitely. There will be a standard pattern. I think it's fair to say that in order to measure it against other samples, we probably want to have a reasonable sized swatch of just plain stocking stitch with a little bit of garter, and also I want to try and incorporate some cables and some lace. In terms of how many grams you should sample with, I guess that's going to be a little bit different for everybody, just depending on how thick or thin you spin. So I would say probably allowing something like, 20 grams would be a really good call. I think 20 kind of gives you enough to work with that you should be able to get a reasonable size sample. And remember that part of this learning process is being able to look back at these samples later on and be able to say, oh, I really like the way that fibre felt when it's been knitted. I like the structure of the cables, or I like how much the lace opens up when I spin it in this particular way. So I would encourage you to be really careful about your record keeping. Try to include a sample of your unfinished 2-ply plyback. If you don't normally do that, or if you don't know what that is, as you're spinning, just take a little bit of yarn off the side of your bobbin. It's really important to pull it off the bobbin because what's on the bobbin is your actual yarn. What's not on the bobbin yet hasn't completely been spun. So pull it off the bobbin and just let it ply back on itself. That is a 2-ply plyback sample, and that's something to keep hold of, because after the yarn is finished, it's going to be kind of hard to figure out what the original yarn on the wheel looked like. So that's the thing that you really need to compare it to. So try to be fairly careful about your record keeping with your samples. Again, I'll put a few more ideas on the Ravelry group about keeping samples, but what I tend to keep a record of is a 2-ply plyback sample of the spun but unfinished yarn. Also, I would say if you're working from fleece particularly, then a sample of what the locks look like would be really useful. If I'm doing more than 2 plies, then I also keep samples of a 3-ply plyback. I don't generally do anything more than 3-ply, but if I was, I would probably keep samples of that as well. And then a sample of the finished yarn. Keeping a sample of the freshly spun 2-ply and the finished yarn is going to allow you to help replicate that later on. So if you come to doing a project and you think, oh, I really love the way that that sample came out, you should have something there to compare it to. It's also very much worth taking a record of how many twists per inch are in that 2-ply plyback. Just because over time it's possible that some of that twist may be lost. So if you keep a record of it while it's freshly spun, again, you'll know what to look for when you're actually spinning it next. I, for once, don't really have a lot of shiny new things this week, with the one exception of a little pin. It's a very, very cute little pin, which is going to go on my field bag, and it is a little alpaca. It's a little blue alpaca and it's very cute. It is going to go on my field bag, but I have to wait first of all for the arrival of some locking pins, because I don't trust butterfly clasps on pins. I just think they really easily come off. So I've got some locking pins on their way, and that should allow it to lock on so that I don't lose it, because I don't want to lose my cute little blue alpaca. He's so sweet. I did mention last week that I was on a week off and that I was hoping to get some insert videos shot for the podcast. I did manage to do that. I've got about 40 minutes worth of content shot and edited and all ready to just be dropped into podcast episodes. That's going to include a roundup of my different spinning wheels. For those who've been asking about my treadle wheels, which don't make very much of an appearance in the podcast, I have been through each of those and kind of given you the story behind them and the thing that I think they're best suited to. In this episode, though, I had a bit of an exploration of the question about whether it's quicker to spin on an e-spinner or a traditional treadle wheel. So one of the questions that's been asked fairly frequently is, what are the differences between spinning on an e-spinner like the Hanson Crafts mini spinner that I have set up here, and spinning on a traditional treadle wheel like something along the lines of the shacked sidekick that I have here. So I'm going to attempt to explain those differences. The second part of the question was, is it any quicker spinning on the mini spinner? So first thing you need to know is there are basically two things that control the speed of the flyer on a traditional treadle wheel. The reason why flyer speed is important is as the flyer goes round, that's what's putting twist into your yarn. So let's say that a standard short forward draw takes you 1 second to do. The number of twists that go into it in that 1 second is determined by the speed of the flyer. And the speed of the flyer is determined by two things. First thing is how fast you're treadling. So I could sit here and treadle really fast as I can go, or I could treadle really slowly, And that's going to change how many times the flyer goes round in that 1 second that I'm doing the draw. So that determines how fast the drive wheel is going round. The drive wheel is then connected by the drive band to a whirl or pulley on the back of the flyer. And obviously this will change a little bit depending on the drive system that you're using, but essentially the principles are the same. So if the drive band is connected to a large flyer whirl, then it's going to go more slowly than if it's connected to a smaller drive whirl. So if I wanted to spin with fewer twists for each draw, then I would want my drive band to be on a larger pulley or whirl. If I wanted more twists to go in, then I would want it on a smaller one. And depending on your wheel, you can probably get extra whirls for a lot of wheels that will allow you to go faster or slower. So that's how it's determined on a traditional treadle wheel. So you've got two variables, and one of those variables is going to be determined very much by how relaxed or how stressed out the spinner is. If you are quite stressed out, you might be treadling faster, or if you're listening to faster music, then you might treadle faster than you would do if you were really relaxed and sleepy, or listening to nice, soft classical music or something. So there is a human variable involved in that. And so that's why some people will only ever listen to a certain type of music, or might have a metronome or something going on, so that they can keep track of the treadles and also the variation between their treadling and their drafting. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that although your treadling speed might change, it might be still in proportion to the way that you draft. So it might be that regardless of how fast you're going, when you do one treadle, you draft one. Treadle, draft, etc. So in actual fact, the speed that your feet move may not make a difference to you, because you might be able to increase your drafting speed as well. That's very personal. You're only ever going to find that out by trying. On a mini spinner or on any e-spinner, the human variable is taken away. So you're no longer having to concern yourself with how fast you're treadling, because the wheel is doing it for you. So the way that an e-spinner works is you have a variable speed control, which in this case is just a little knob on the front of the mini spinner, which you can turn around so that you can determine what speed you want to go at. That controls the motor, which is attached to the flyer whirl with a small drive band, and that will allow you to go either really slowly, I mean you can literally turn it down until it's barely moving at all, or really, really, really quickly. The thing to keep in mind is, even though it can go that fast, it's really a question of whether your hands can draft that fast. Because if they can't, then having that extra speed really doesn't make any difference. For me, I normally use it at around about 1 or 2 o'clock, which is probably around that sort of speed at the most. I've never gone up to that speed. And incidentally, it's only being noisy because it's kind of unbalanced at the moment where it's sitting on top of my Zuka case. It's a little bit unbalanced because I've got it at an angle. It doesn't normally make that kind of noise. But yeah, so if your hands can't keep up with it, then the extra speed really doesn't make any difference. The one thing that does make a difference though, is that with a treadle wheel, if I come home from work and I want to do some spinning, I have to sit there on the sofa or in a chair and I have to physically treadle. Now some people find that really meditative. Sometimes though, I'm a little bit on the lazy side and I kind of think, you know what, I don't really want to be sitting upright, having to treadle and draft and all that stuff. So what's really nice with the mini spinner is I can just lie on the sofa, and I normally have my foot control kind of on my lap or under my arm or something, and I can literally just lie on the sofa and just draft away really mindlessly. And so from that point of view, although the mini spinner might not be faster, it's definitely making me more productive because there are more situations in which I'm willing to spin. In other words, when I'm being really lazy, I can still spin and I don't have to worry about it. So hopefully that has gone some way towards answering your question. To just sum it all up, essentially, yes, the e-spinners can go really quickly, and the human variable of how fast your feet are treadling is taken away, so it's a more consistent speed. However, if your drafting speed is really synchronised with your treadling speed, you might find that not particularly helpful. And also, your drafting speed is really the bottleneck in the process. So if your hands can't keep up with the drafting, then the extra speed is not going to make any difference. So hopefully you found that useful. If you have any other questions at all, feel free to drop me a comment in YouTube or on Ravelry, and I will do my best to answer those questions. So there we go. I don't think I'm any quicker, but interestingly, somebody on Instagram that I follow has received an e-spinner, I think as a present from her husband at Madrona Fibre Arts. Awesome. Seriously, that guy's a keeper. And she was saying that she was definitely felt much faster. So I'm intrigued. If you are an e-spinner, please let me know if you think you're faster on an e-spinner or a treadle wheel in real time, in terms of not just whether you're more productive because it's easier, but are you physically faster at spinning a certain amount of yarn? I'm really interested. I'll throw it open for discussion, and you can use the comments here or the Ravelry group to discuss whether you're faster. Before we wrap up this episode of the podcast, I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who has shared information about the podcast on Ravelry, Instagram, Swedish Facebook spinners group. Apparently somebody found it on there. My Google Analytics says that there was a quilting blog that featured it, all sorts of stuff. So thank you so much for sharing. It really helps to get the word out there to people who might find it interesting. So if there is anybody out there who you think would be interested in what we're trying to achieve with Tiny Fibre Studio, then please let them know about it. Don't forget to subscribe as well so that you don't miss out on any of the content that comes up. I really appreciate all of the subscribes and thumbs up and comments. It just makes the work that I put into the podcast seem really worthwhile, as well as just being a record of what I'm doing with Handspun 17. So thank you all so much for that. Just before we leave this episode, I'll just quickly mention I've talked about the sweater before. This is Blank Canvas by Ysolda Teague. This is another Ysolda Teague pattern called Barley Sugar in Fibre Spates Scrumptious Lace Weights. It was knitted years ago and I really like it. It's a really nice lightweight cowl. I even wore it in California when I was out there, so it's nice and kind of lightweight, doesn't feel too warm or heavy. And if you ever saw my tutorial on how to pick up stitches in brioche, this was the project where I dropped the stitch. I dropped the stitch, and by the time I realised that I dropped it, I was, 10 rows up, and I thought there is no way that I'm tinking back that far in my knitting. So I just sat there for hours working out how to pick up this stitch, and then posted a tutorial about it on YouTube. So you may possibly have originally come across me on that tutorial. I know every so often I get a little flurry of people going, "Thank you so much, you've saved my project," and it's really lovely to hear that. So that is Barley Sugar by Ysolda Teague. So that is it for Tiny Fibre Studio episode 7. Thank you again so much for joining me. Feel free to share this with anybody that you think might be interested. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you enjoyed this podcast, give me a little thumbs up as well, just so I know people are enjoying it. And in between now and the next episode, you can find me on Instagram as Tiny Fibre Studio. On Ravelry, I'm Becks, and there's also the Ravelry group as well. Drop into there for some support and community around the sample along. And I will see you next time.